Thanks everyone for joining us today. Excited to hear from Dr. Van Iersel. Start with an introduction of the GLAZE webinar series. So the GLAZE Consortium webinar series is a selection of live recorded online presentations that cover a broad range of topics related to the controlled environment agriculture. These webinars feature the latest technological innovations and best practices in the CEA field, providing the audience the opportunity to discover new solutions and to connect with the field experts. My name is Erico Matos. I am the host of the GLAZE webinar series. I've been working as the GLAZE Consortium Executive Director for the past 4 years, and it is my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Mark Van Iersel from the University of Georgia. Dr. Van Iersel will be talking to us today about better ways to provide your crop the lights it needs. Dr. Van Iersel received his PhD from the University of Arkansas in 1994. He has been with the Horticulture Department of University of Georgia since 1995, where he now holds the Dooley Professorship. His research focuses on cost-effective supplemental lighting technologies in greenhouses and vertical farms. He is the director of the project LAMP, which stands for Lighting Approach to Maximize Profit, which is a $5 million US-based research project that brings together plant scientists, engineers, and economists to develop profitable supplemental lighting strategies. In 2017, Dr. Van Iersel co-founded Candidus to help bring novel lighting strategies to greenhouse industry. Dr. Van Iersel has published 140 plus scientific papers and has given invited lectures about his research all around the world, including Italy, Spain, Taiwan, Kenya, Canada, Chile, and my beloved Brazil, where I come from. Dr. Van Iersel was also one of my advisors when I was in grad school, so it's always a pleasure having Mark talking to us here on the GLAZE webinar series. Just before we start, I would like to let you know that a recorded version of this webinar will be available at our website at glaze.org, where you can find all the previous webinars and you can also register for the upcoming ones. We have now on a full agenda from today all the way to December, so one a month. I encourage you to visit glaze.org and register for all the upcoming webinars. If you have any questions about the presentation or if you'd like to get in contact with Mark, please submit your inquiries using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to respond all the questions today, and the ones that we cannot respond today, we can follow up afterwards. So one more time, please use the Q&A box and not the message. It's just easy for us to track the questions afterwards, and then we can make sure we don't miss any of the questions. With that said, Mark, thanks again for being our speaker today. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for that introduction, Erico. And before I get started on today's topic, we'll start off with a quick quiz that I'll hopefully remember to answer at the end of this seminar. AJ both in the chat asked a question of what this leaf is in that I use as my background. So if you want to submit your guesses what this leaf may be, the winner will get, I don't know what, will get something if someone gets it right. I'll figure out a prize for you later on. Remind me at the end of the webinar to get back to that. So Erico mentioned Project LAMP, which I had, but Project LAMP is really a collaboration of many different people, and it is really focused on cost effectiveness of supplemental lighting. And to be able to study the cost effectiveness of lighting, you really probably need to start with one very simple question. And that question is, how much does it actually cost to provide supplemental lighting in a greenhouse? So the question is simple, but getting the answer to that question is actually pretty complicated because the cost of supplemental lighting depends on quite a few different factors, and that includes where in the world you are, what type of greenhouse you have, what type of crop you grow, and obviously the amount of supplemental light that you need to grow your crops changes over the course of a year. So it can be pretty difficult actually to estimate how much you are paying for the electricity to provide that light. But we estimate that depending on what kind of a crop you grow and where you are, the cost of electricity for the supplemental lighting is typically somewhere between about 10 and 30% of operating cost. So to help people estimate the cost of supplemental lighting, we have developed a lighting cost calculator, and this is going to be available on the LAMP website very soon, hopefully early next week. And this calculator is going to help you determine the cost of supplemental light in your specific greenhouse. It works very simple, I hope. So on the first screen, you simply enter the name of your greenhouse, or any string of characters. Doesn't really matter what you enter there. You enter the zip code, and your zip code is required because the app can then access a database with historical light data to look at how much light you would typically get in your specific location, and you enter the electricity rate. When you save that information, go to the next screen. In case you have multiple greenhouses, you can enter a name for a specific greenhouse range that you want to simulate, the size of that greenhouse, just based on length and width, the light transmission into your greenhouse. So if that is something that you don't know for sure, you probably are going to have to estimate that. You provide the target daily light integral. So how much light do you want your crop to get every day? And the lighting efficacy of your lighting system. So that basically is a measure of the amount of light that is produced by your lighting system per unit energy that goes into it. Once that information is saved, there's one other tool that we have in this calculator. This wheel right here, when you click on that, it allows you to set for different months of the year how much of your greenhouse should be lit at different months of the year. So you can turn off your lighting system in summer, and other times of the year, if you think you might only provide lighting in half of your greenhouse, you can do that using this gear tool. And that's all the information that is required for the calculator. So when you then go to the next screen, you get this output. And what you are going to see here is, first in the top left, these are the inputs that you as a user provided. So this is what is used for the calculations. The calculator then determines the annual lighting cost, and that is calculated both per square foot, per acre, and for the sizes of the greenhouse that you enter. So that is based on this area right here in square feet. The calculator then breaks those lighting costs down by month. So you get that same information here in a table for each individual month, and that gets graphed automatically as well. And then at the very bottom of the screen, you can see how much of the greenhouse is being lit different months of the year. So that is another input variable that you can provide. So we just finished developing this tool, and now that we have this, we're doing some last-minute quality checks. But hopefully next week, this tool is going to be available on the website for the LAMP project, which is www.hotlamp.org. And on that website, if you go to the outreach page, you will find this calculator. If you use this calculator, we would love feedback, since this is a new tool and we want to learn from you how we can make this more useful for you. So we are planning to constantly upgrade this tool based on what information we get from you. So this is a great way for you to get an idea of how much supplemental lighting is going to cost. But the real topic of today's webinar is trying to find ways to get more value out of that supplemental light that you provide. And so we do that by first trying to understand the physiology of the plants. And specifically, we start off with one really basic question, and that is, how efficiently do plants use the light that they get? Plants cannot use all of the light that they receive for photosynthesis, and it turns out that this is actually a really dynamic process, that efficiency changes over the course of a day, and that happens every single day. But it turns out that that efficiency is actually very easy to measure in a research setting. And once we know that, we can use that kind of information to come up with practical applications that will hopefully help you to develop better lighting strategies. And so to give you a bit of an idea of what we do and what our basic research approach is, I'm going to give you a pretty simple example. And so here we have 3 days worth of light data, photosynthetic photon flux or photosynthetic photon flux density, that we measured inside of my research greenhouse at the University of Georgia. And so you can, of course, see that at night there is no light, and then during the day, light tends to be higher in the middle of the day, but there is a lot of variability. That is partly due because of changes in weather, and it is also partly due because of the overhead structure of the greenhouse. So what we did during the same 3-day period is that we measured how efficiently petunia plants that we were growing in this greenhouse were using the light that they received. So that is shown right here in this light blue color. We have light use efficiency now on the second y-axis that goes from 0 to 1. And what you can see is that that light use efficiency changes pretty dramatically over the course of a day. So it's always high at night when there is when there is no light available. So that's not really all that important, other than that this is a good sign that indicates that the plants are actually healthy. Sorry. Then during the day, what you see is that the light use efficiency initially declines, and then it is somewhat erratic during the middle of the day, but that is consistent with the fact that the light levels in the greenhouse are also highly variable. And then the light use efficiency increases again later in the day. So when we plot the data this way, it is really difficult to actually see clear trends. But if we now plot the photosynthetic photon flux density against the light use efficiency, we can see how the light level in the greenhouse actually affects how efficiently the plants can use the light that they receive. So that's what I did right here. So now we have the light use efficiency on the left y-axis. And what you can see is that when light intensity increases, the light use efficiency of plants decreases. And this is an example for petunia, but this is true for all plant species. The rate at which the light use efficiency decreases with increasing light level may be different among species, but this is inevitable. In all plants, the light use efficiency decreases as we get a higher light level. So that's a universal plant response. Once we know what the light use efficiency is, it turns out that we can then calculate an important other parameter from that data. And this is a diagram of what actually happens when light is absorbed inside of the chloroplast, inside of a leaf. And so this part right here is a membrane that is present in the chloroplasts. And the chlorophyll is embedded in this membrane. So light is absorbed right here and also over here. And the energy from that light is actually used to move an electron from water through a series of intermediates, ultimately to an acceptor right here. It doesn't really matter right now what that acceptor is. But so literally what happens inside of a plant is very similar to what happens in a solar panel. When a plant is exposed to light, an electrical current is created, or in reality, billions and billions of really, really tiny electrical currents. And just like with a solar panel, the energy from that electrical current can then be used to drive other processes. And in the case of a plant, that other process is photosynthesis. So this is basically how plants harvest light energy and convert it into chemical compounds that then can be used to drive photosynthesis. So one parameter that we are really interested in, and that is easy to quantify, is the rate of electron transport inside of a leaf. So when we do that, with the data that I showed previously, what we see is that the electron transport rate in a leaf increases with increasing light levels, as you might expect. And again, that analogy with a solar panel is relevant here. With a solar panel, of course, there too, you get more energy harvested at higher light levels. And this, again, is also a universal response. This happens in all species. So the shape of this curve, though, has important practical implications. You can see that this is not a straight line, so it starts to level off a little bit as you get to higher light levels. And I included this graph because I think this is a useful way to illustrate an important concept in supplemental lighting. So what I'm going to do now is show some really simple animations that show how much the electron transport rate increases when we provide 100 micromoles of supplemental light with different amounts of background of sunlight. So let's say that it is dark, and now we provide 100 micromoles of supplemental light right here. Then this is the increase in electron transport rate that we get. So that's about 25 micromoles per square meter of second. Those are the units of electron transport rate. But the number is important here. So we get an increase in 25 in electron transport rate. If we provide the same amount of supplemental light when we already have 200 micromoles of sunlight, then this becomes the increase in electron transport rate, which is about 20. And you can see that now if we provide supplemental light, again, the same amount as indicated by this yellow arrow, the increase in electron transport rate is getting to be much smaller than it is if we provide supplemental light in darkness. And the higher the background light intensity is, the more pronounced this decrease in electron transport rate becomes. And the practical implication of this is that supplemental light should be provided ideally when there is little sunlight. And so in many cases in greenhouses, supplemental light is controlled based on a light sensor, and the lights are turned on and off automatically based on how much light you get from the sun. So we do a lot of studies on the underlying photosynthetic physiology of plants, but we want to take that information then to try to figure out how we can improve greenhouse production practices. And so based on the physiology, photosynthetic physiology, we came up with a few different hypotheses that we thought would help with making supplemental lighting more cost effective. One is to provide supplemental light when there is little sunlight, and in many cases that is already done. So this is actually not a topic that I'll be discussing today. The second one is that theoretically, keeping the light level at the crop level as constant as possible should provide benefits and better growth than having fluctuating light levels. And thirdly, longer photoperiods and that provide the same total amount of light over the course of the whole day, so the same daily light integral, will result in more photosynthesis and therefore more growth. And so I'm going to start off with point number 3, and I again want to illustrate the principle behind this using physiology before then going into some practical results. So Claudia Elkins, a former master student in my lab, did a study in a growth chamber where she exposed lettuce plants to different light intensities for different amounts of time. And the key to this data set is that the daily light integral, or the total amount of light that these plants received, was the same regardless of the photoperiod. So I'm showing here just data for photoperiods of 7, 13, and 22 hours. And so basically what that means is that when we went from a photoperiod from 7 to 13 hours, the light intensity was cut almost in half to make sure that the total amount of light over the course of the whole day would stay the same. And in the 22-hour photoperiod, the light intensity was a little bit more than 1/3, was a little bit less than 1/3 of what it was with a 7-hour photoperiod, to maintain that daily light integral of, in this case, 20 moles per square meter per day. And so what Claudia did in our study was to measure the electron transport rate that I talked about earlier over the course of that whole photoperiod. So that's what these different lines are. And we can then calculate the total amount of electron transport rate over the course of a day, which is going to correlate really well with the amount of photosynthesis that occurs in these plants by just looking at the area underneath the curve. So this blue area gives an indication of the total amount of electron transport rate in one day when we have a 7-hour photoperiod at a high light level. If we go to a photoperiod of 13 hours, then this area now indicates the total amount of electron transport, and you can see, hopefully, that that is larger than it was with 7 days, and the effect becomes really pronounced when we look at the 22-hour photoperiod, where you can see that the total amount of electron transport rate is much greater than what it was with 22 hours. So based on these results, we hypothesized that this would translate to differences in growth as well. So next up, Claudia did a study in the greenhouse where we built a lighting control system that can very precisely control the amount of supplemental light that we provide based on the amount of sunlight that we have. So typically when it is sunny, the lights will be off, and when it gets overcast, the lights will automatically provide a very precisely controlled amount of supplemental light. What this control system allows us to do is that we can program in a combination of various photoperiods and various daily light integrals, and our control system can then make sure that the crop gets the exact amount of light that we want over the photoperiod that we specify. So in Claudia's study, what she did in this system was grow Rudbeckia seedlings, where she had one treatment where the seedlings received only sunlight, and those seedlings got a daily light integral of, on average, about 5 moles per square meter per day, but that differed from day to day because of the changes in weather. And then she had 4 other treatments where the daily light integral was 12 moles per square meter per day. So I want to really emphasize, in all of the other treatments, the plants received the exact same amount of light, but the difference here was that that light was provided over 12, 15, 18, or 21 hours. And I'll give you an idea of what those plants look like at the end of the study. So here we have plants from the 5 treatments. On the left, right here, we have the control plants without supplemental lighting. They look pretty bad. They didn't grow very well, which is not surprising given the very low amount of light that these plants got. So we're not really interested in that treatment anyway. So I'll just make it go away. And so here you see plants from the other 4 treatments that all received the same amount of light, but spread out over different photoperiods. And what you may be able to see, hopefully you can, is that as we go from a 12-hour to a 21-hour photoperiod, these plants are getting bigger. The longer the photoperiod, the larger the plants were. So I'll have some data to back that up and to quantify that response. So here we have the above ground dry weight of the plants, or the shoot dry weight, as a function of the photoperiod, with this dashed line right here indicating the very low dry weight for the control plants. But what is most important in this and the following graphs is that there was a trend towards larger plants with longer photoperiods. So we saw a 33% increase here in shoe dry weight by simply spreading the light out over a longer period. So that is without any increase in the electricity cost, because we're providing the same amount of supplemental light in all 4 of those treatments. Now, since we were working with seedlings, we were really interested in the root dry weight, because that really determines when the plants are ready for sale or for transplant. And so for root dry weight, we also saw a trend towards increasing root size with longer photoperiods, and that effect was 22%. And then another really important parameter for seedlings is how compact they are. And compactness is something that we calculate by taking the dry weight of the plant and we divide that by the height of the plant. And that tells us whether the plants are stretching and getting really tall but leggy, or whether plants may simply get larger without necessarily becoming leggy. And so what we've also found in this study is that the compactness actually tends to increase here with longer photoperiods. So that suggests that that is actually a better quality plant, and that compactness was increased by 13%. So this study we thought was a great success. We have subsequently done very similar studies with lettuce as well as with other leafy greens. And what we consistently find is that longer photoperiods without increasing the amount of light that the plants get results in more photosynthesis and better growth of the plants. And so we've done this with both ornamental plants as well as with leafy greens. And so one advantage of providing longer photoperiods is that you can provide lower light intensities. And what that means is that you don't need as many light fixtures in your greenhouse to be able to supply that supplemental light. So it will actually reduce the capital expenses of the lighting system if you can use longer photoperiods and lower light intensities. So that was a very promising finding and something that I think can have important applications in the industry. So this was one case where, based on physiology, we made a prediction and we were able to confirm that does indeed work. The next thing that I would like to look at is what is the importance of keeping the light level at the crop level as constant as possible. Theoretically, we expected that that would be beneficial. And the first study that we did related to this was done with lettuce that was grown in a growth chamber, which provided us complete control over the lighting. And all of the plants were grown with the same daily light integral and the same photoperiod, but we were changing the light level every 15 minutes. And the reason that we were interested in looking at whether or not the plants would tolerate these changes in light level was to try to figure out if it is possible for growers in controlled environment agriculture to take advantage of fluctuations in electricity prices. Because what we are hoping is that if you are in a situation where you have variable electricity rates, that you can provide more of your supplemental light when the electricity prices are lower. And so in this study, we have some really extreme treatments. We had one treatment right here where plants received 15 minutes of 400 micromoles of light, and then that was followed by 15 minutes of darkness. That was the most extreme. And then we had another treatment right here where the plants always received 200 micromoles per square meter per second throughout the entire 16-hour photoperiod. And then we have 4 other treatments here where the light level would change every 15 hours, but not quite as extreme as it did in this treatment here at the top. So what we were expecting in this study is that a constant light level would give us the best growth and we would get the worst growth with going from highlight to darkness every 15 minutes. To give you an idea of what that study looked like, this is a picture of part of the setup in the growth chamber, where these plants right here are now not receiving any supplemental light, but 15 minutes from now, they'll be exposed to highlight. And all of these plants are receiving right now slightly different light levels, but that's really, really difficult to see. So we did this with 2 different cultivars, but the 2 cultivars really responded pretty much the same. So this is what the green salad bowl lettuce looked like at the end of the study, with the plants at the top receiving a constant light intensity throughout the photo period. And these poor things at the bottom, these are the plants that were exposed to 15 minutes of highlight, followed by 15 minutes of low light, and have that alternate throughout the entire growing period. And as you can see, those plants didn't do very well. They didn't grow much. And on top of that, they obviously look horrible. They have very little chlorophyll. So we actually quantified chlorophyll levels in this study, and that is shown right here. So on the x-axis, let me explain that first. When we go from 0 to 200, these numbers refer to the lower of the 2 light levels that the plants were exposed to. So basically the plants over here were exposed to 0 micromoles for 15 minutes, followed by 400 micromoles for 15 minutes, and so on. And then as we go in this direction, the fluctuations in light level became smaller and smaller. And so what you see is that in the treatment where the light levels fluctuated between highlight and darkness, the chlorophyll levels were very low, as you can also see in that picture. But in the other treatments, the chlorophyll levels were actually all pretty similar. So as long as we didn't expose the plants to darkness every 15 minutes, the plants were able to produce chlorophyll pretty well. My former master student, Wukaya Buyan, then also harvested the plants at the end of the growing cycle. She measured the leaf area for the 2 cultivars of lettuce, as well as the dry weight of the above ground parts of the plants. And what you can see is that once again here, with very drastic fluctuations in light level, the plants grew very poorly. But in most of the other treatments, and this is really what surprised us, it didn't really seem to make a difference with either with respect to either leaf area or the dry weight of the plant. So these plants actually tolerated pretty substantial fluctuations in light level quite well without a negative impact on growth. So here, for example, these plants were exposed to light levels that alternated between 80 and 320 micromoles every 15 minutes, but they grew pretty much as well as plants that received 200 micromoles constantly. So that really surprised us. So it was only really the very large fluctuations where we saw a negative impact on growth. But if the plants received at least 80 micromoles during the low light period, then those plants were able to grow quite well. So what we concluded from this was actually that lettuce can tolerate a wide range of light fluctuations without a negative impact. So the positive aspect of this, that this does suggest that if you are in a location where you have variable electricity rates, at least for lettuce, it's probably a good idea to take advantage of those variable electricity rates and preferentially provide supplemental light when the electricity costs are low, and provide very little or no supplemental light when electricity rates are high. So it turns out that the hypothesis that we started with, it didn't really work out. We were wrong about this, and it turns out so plants do not really need to be exposed to constant light levels to get the best possible growth. Then the next thing that we were interested in is how about day-to-day fluctuations in the daily light integral? When you're growing in a greenhouse, obviously some days are going to be a lot sunnier than other days. Now, theoretically, what we predicted based on the physiology of the plants is that if the daily light integral is the same every single day, you should get better crop growth than having daily light integrals that, that vary from day to day, as long as they average out to the same amount of light over the course of the whole growing cycle. But from a practical perspective, from a greenhouse situation, if you have a sunny day, if you had a sunny day yesterday, can you actually lower the target daily light integral for today without a negative impact on growth? Basically, can you take advantage of those sunny days to provide less supplemental light if you have an overcast day after that sunny day? So to study this, we have done studies both in the greenhouse and in a growth chamber. It's a little bit easier to do in a growth chamber. So what we did here is, once again, we grew lettuce, and on average, in all of the treatments, the plants got a daily light integral of 15 moles per square meter per day. Our control treatment is shown here at the top, where every day throughout the entire growing cycle, the plants got the same amount of light, 15 moles per square meter per day. But then as we go further down, you can see that we are simulating sunny days right here with daily light integrals greater than 15, but they were then followed by a simulated cloudy day, or a day with less supplemental light, in such a way that on average, the daily light integral of those two treatments is always 15. So again, I want to emphasize all of the plants in the study received the same amount of light. So in the graphs, the way that this data is going to be shown is based on how much extra light these plants got on a sunny day as compared to the control that got 15 moles per square meter per day. So as in the graphs that you'll see, as this value gets bigger, the plants are exposed to bigger fluctuations in the daily light integral. So an overview of this study looks fairly similar actually to the previous picture I showed from Rukaya's study. This study here was done by my PhD student, DC Jayalath. And so at the end of the study, he measured the dry weight and the leaf area of the two cultivars. This is green salad bowl and red salad bowl. And so again, on the x-axis, we go here from the same daily light integral every day to increasingly large variations in the daily light integral from day to day. And so what DC found in this study is that in most of these treatments, the plants actually grew pretty similar. Once the light fluctuations get really large, we start seeing a little bit of a decrease in the leaf area of those plants. And the graph for the dry weight looks pretty much the same, with very little or no effect, with a fairly wide range of changes in daily light interval. So when we're looking at a value of 7.5 here, what this means is that the plants are getting a daily light integral of 22.5 one day and 7.5 the next day. And those plants grow just as well as plants that get a daily light integral of 15 moles per square meter per day every single day. And when we get to very large fluctuations, we did start seeing a significant decrease in the dry weight of the plants. But basically what this tells us is that just like plants can tolerate short-term fluctuations in light level pretty well, plants can tolerate fluctuations in daily light integral much better than we had anticipated. And so that provides some interesting opportunities, I think, for the greenhouse industry to come up with new lighting control approaches where we don't worry so much about providing the same daily light integral each day, because that doesn't really seem to be needed. So what we call this idea that you can alternate the DLI between high and low values from day to day, we refer to that as the carryover of excess daily light integral one day to the next day. And that seems to be working just fine. And to give you an idea of the practical implications of this, we used a lighting cost calculator, very similar to the one that I talked about at the start of this presentation, to quantify the energy savings that we can achieve by carrying over that excess DLI from a sunny day to a cloudy day. And so we did these calculations for 5 different locations in the US. We picked some pretty extreme ones. Yuma, Arizona, of course, doesn't require a whole lot of supplemental light. We have 3 locations here that have pretty dark winters, and then we included Athens, Georgia, just because that's where we happen to be. And so using a lighting cost calculator, we calculated the total energy that is required to provide the supplemental light here with the pink bar. We are not carrying over any of that excess DLI from one day to the next. And in the light blue bar right here, we can reduce the energy requirements for the supplemental lighting by carrying over excess light from one day to a cloudy day the next day. And we then converted that energy requirement, so that's calculated in megawatts per acre, to an actual cost savings. And so in Athens, Georgia, what that would mean is that we can reduce the electrical cost by $7,200 per acre per year. So that's a pretty nice savings that you can get without any negative impacts on growth. When we do the same calculations for other locations, you can see that in all locations we reduce energy use with that carryover of excess DLI. And in New York, Michigan, and Washington, we get financial savings, assuming an electricity price of 10 cents per kilowatt hour, of roughly $7,000 to $9,000 per acre. Only in Yuma, Arizona, are the financial savings really small, but this is kind of irrelevant, because if you're growing lettuce in Arizona, you probably don't have a supplemental lighting system. But so this is a very simple way to reduce your electricity cost without having a negative impact on your growth. So to make sure we have time for questions, I'm going to wrap things up. So what I want you to remember from this webinar is that when you are using supplemental lighting, avoid using the supplemental light when you have ample sunlight. Precise control over the instantaneous light level or the daily light integral is not needed. The plants can tolerate some fluctuations without meaningful changes in the growth of the crop. And whenever possible, try to increase the photoperiod that you use for your crop and provide lower light intensities. That is going to give you more crop growth for the same amount of supplemental light that you provide. One caveat there is that you need to take into account how your specific crop may respond to longer photoperiods. For example, in many ornamental species, the photoperiod is going to determine when the plants are going to flower, and you certainly don't want to inhibit flowering or get premature flowering in ornamental plants. So that is something that you should take into account. With that, I would like to thank the USDA for funding this research, as well as the many collaborators on this project. I'm just really pleased that I have such a fantastic team of collaborators. And with that, I hope that there are some questions, and I'm going to see if someone figured out what species that leaf was before I forget about that.
Thanks, Mark. Great presentation, like always. So to start with the question of the leaf behind you, we get just two tries here, two guesses. Someone said lettuce and someone said sunflower. Are we close here?
And no, I'm afraid not. It's Gunnera. Probably not a plant that everyone is familiar with. It's from a picture I took at a garden in Ireland. And it has leaves that are probably 6 to 8 feet across, which makes it really easy to get nice pictures of the veins in the leaf.
Nice. All right, perfect. So yeah, we did have a good amount of questions still coming up here. So let's start from the beginning. First question I got was how do we know the DLI from the crop you grow? So at the beginning, you're talking about right giving a certain DLI. So it's a more general question. How can we find out this information, the DLI about the specific crops people are growing?
So that's a good question. A lot of growers do that based on experience, but there are many online resources available from extension services around the country that give recommendations for the daily light integral for different crops. The most extensive list of DLI recommendations is probably from a publication out of Purdue University written by Roberto Lopez and one of his graduate students.
Perfect. So yeah, looking online can be a good resource, and there are, like Mark said, many credible resources you can find for this information. The second question is, how can you measure light use efficiency instantaneously? I've always seen is that reported as grams per mole, probably grams of biomass, right? Which requires a harvest and it is calculated over the course of a growth cycle. So if you can talk more about the methodology used for that.
Yes, so I actually took the slides out of the presentation that shows how we measure this. It is actually measured based on the amount of fluorescence that a plant gives off. Many of you may not be familiar with the fact that plants fluoresce, but anytime that a plant is exposed to light, a very small fraction of the light that is absorbed by the plant is subsequently given off by that plant in the form of fluorescence, and that is in the red and far right part of the spectrum. By measuring how much light is actually given off by the plant, we can calculate then how efficiently the plant is using the light that it receives. The theory behind it is rather complex. It's very easy to use, but not really practical in a production setting. But it's based on chlorophyll fluorescence measurements.
Perfect. And related to that, Mark, what is the units used to measure light use efficiency?
Well, so the reason that I didn't have units for light use efficiency is basically because it is a unitless measure. But a simpler way to think about it is basically the moles of light that are used by the plant divided by the moles of light that are absorbed by the plant. So it's mole per mole. So the units cancel out.
Perfect. Thanks. Another question, this one more specific, was saying that here, the study of Claudia, the study done by your student Claudia on ETR, was that done with lettuce? Which was the crop for Claudia's study?
Yes, the study with electron transport rate, that was done with lettuce. The same trends are going to hold up for any species. The exact numbers would change, but the trend would be the same.
Perfect. And lots of questions on the ETR here. So the next one is, what was the interval between each ETR measuring point? And then was that obtained from different points of a leaf, or did he use entire crop canopy monitoring system?
So the electron transport rate was measured every 15 minutes, and it was measured on one small part of one leaf. And that is one of the drawbacks of these measurements. Although it is possible to measure entire plants, that's very expensive. And when I say entire plants, that typically refers to one small Arabidopsis plant. So it is a technique that is difficult to scale to entire crops, unfortunately.
Perfect. Now a more broad question. That's an interesting one. What is your expectation of extrapolating these trials to tomatoes? So going to another crop.
So with tomatoes, my expectation there too would be that if you provide the same daily light integral over longer photoperiods, that you would get better growth and higher yields. With tomatoes, of course, keep in mind that that is one crop that doesn't like very long days. So tomatoes do need, I believe, at least 4 hours of darkness every night. For lettuce, you could actually get plants to light 24 hours a day, and they're fine. But tomato plants are not going to like not having a night. They develop physiological disorders that are pretty serious. But you can probably go to 20 hours a day.
And you did address this at the end of the presentation, right? That's a good point. So kind of similar line of questions here. Did you keep the photoperiod constant during all the lettuce culture time, so from seed to harvest? And then more specifically, the question is, if you did, don't you think that 18 hours or 21 hours photoperiod could be too long compared to the photosynthetic capacity of young lettuce plants, so during the young stages of the plant?
We did keep the photoperiod constant throughout the entire growing cycle. Yes. No, I don't think that having long photoperiods early in the growing cycle would have a detrimental effect on those plants. What we actually do a lot of imaging in a lot of these studies, so we can follow growth of these plants non-destructively, and we typically start seeing differences in growth pretty early on in the growing cycle. So it doesn't seem to have a negative impact.
Okay. Good question here now. Is there very technical? Is there a good conversion from DLI measure in joules per day? So.
Yes, well, yeah, there is. I don't recall off the top of my head what it is. I wrote an article about that on ResearchGate. So I'm not sure who asked that question, but I can answer that in more detail. If I remember correctly, 1 joule, I believe, is equivalent to 2.05 micromoles, would be the conversion. But before I give a definitive answer, I need to double check my math. So I'd be happy to follow up on that one.
Perfect. Yeah, that's coming. You might know him, Bob Hoffman.
Yeah, and that's specifically for sunlight. That's one thing that I want to emphasize. The conversion is different for different kinds of light, and so that conversion factor of about 2 works for sunlight.
Perfect. And then also to that question, I know AJ Both from Rutgers University, he recently published a plant lighting conversion factor page summary, which might have this specific information, but I'll follow up with that supplemental material. Great question. Next question now is, when taking a PPFD footprint of the anticipated growing area, it is a common practice to change the position or the intensity of the lights as the canopy gets closer to the light. So I think it's an affirmation is less question here. So do you take that in consideration, Mark, or as the plants get closer to the light?
So that is something that you may need to take into account for certain crops. When I look at that crop behind you, Erico, you can grow those plants forever, and they are never going to get meaningfully closer to the lights, right? So for lettuce, that is just not an issue. For most ornamental plants, that would not be an issue. For cannabis, that would be an issue, right? Because they can get really close to the lights. But on the other hand, cannabis can use light so well that as long as you can afford to pay the power bill, it seems like you can give cannabis all of the light that you possibly can, and the plants are as happy as can be.
Yeah, that is right. And I think I agree with you as well. With the design of this place, I think very, very location dependent, those type of questions. Next one is a good one here. Did you observe any tip burn when you fluctuate the DLI in same cases quite substantially? So you have some big differences in DLI. Did you see any tip burn or any other type of side effect, should that matter?
So we did not see tip burn in the study we did in the growth chamber with the red and green salad ball lattice, and that is probably because those lattices have a very open growth habit. And so they're not all that susceptible to tip burn, and it's easy to get enough air movement to prevent it. In the greenhouse sometimes, and we've worked with green towers lattice, which forms a pretty tight heart. There, if we use any kind of lighting treatment that makes the plants grow faster, we typically also end up with more tip burn as a result of that. Because unfortunately, in many cases, the growth rate and tip burn severity are related to each other.
Perfect. Another nice question related to the intervals, the study of the intervals. So can plants perform better in 24/7 light environments, or do they need a dark break, night, right, keeping the lights off during the night in a vertical farm for leafy greens or for vegetative growth?
So most leafy greens do not need any darkness. They do just fine with continuous light. I certainly haven't tried that for every possible leafy green that is out there, but most of them do just fine. So really the one crop where you really have to have a night period is tomato. That's definitely the best known example. There may be a few other crops, but I think even close relatives of tomato, like bell pepper, don't have the same problems that tomato do with continuous light.
Perfect. I think we have time for one more question before I get to three, and we had several other questions, Mark. I can follow up with you on those, and you can maybe reply to them individually. But that's a nice last one here. Does DLI correlates well with the daily photosynthesis integral? Does it show a linear trend?
I'll give a real scientific answer to that one. It depends. So, like I showed with the, I showed a graph that showed the electron transport rate over the course of a day. If you give plants the same daily light integral, you will get more photosynthesis with that same amount of light if that light is provided over longer photoperiods. Other than that, when you increase the daily light integral, the daily photosynthetic integral is going to increase as well, although it will not increase linearly with increasing daily light integrals.
Sure. Yeah, you probably get to a point of diminishing returns, right?
You sure do, yes.
Yeah, and that's, I think there's a lot, probably has a lot of implications, especially if you're paying for the electricity.
And the point of diminishing returns really depends on the crop, as I mentioned. So for lettuce, you would reach that point of diminishing returns much sooner than you would for cannabis, for example.
Perfect. Well, let's squeeze one more, a short one. That's a nice question as well. I want to make sure we get this one done. So is the electron transport rate more impactful to plant development than than the light use index, I guess, LUI?
Then the light use.
Yeah, I glanced to the question. I thought it was leaf area index. I missed the middle letter here. So that's I thought was the question, and I rather realize.
Well, so maybe I'll just rephrase the question and make it about the electron transport rate versus leaf area index. The one thing that we see consistently is most important for growth is the size of the canopy. And especially during the early stage of growth, the more quickly a plant can develop a larger canopy, the faster that plant will end up growing and the bigger it will get. And that is more important than photosynthetic efficiency.
That goes back to your solar panel analogy, I guess, right?
Yes, I do like to talk about plants as being solar panels, and obviously a larger solar panel can harvest more energy. And in the case of plants, that energy can be used for more growth.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Well, Mark, thank you so much for the webinar today. Great presentation, lots of questions. Like I told you, I have more questions here that we don't have time to answer today. I'll share these questions with you. You can follow up with them. There is that question from the conversion as well. We can send a follow-up email there. But thank you so much for attending. Thanks everyone else for joining the webinar today. I hope you guys are going to be back here next month for the next webinar. Mark, any final comments? Anything else before we go?
Well, thank you all for attending. I wish I could do this in person, but I hope to see many of you in person before too long.
Yeah, we all hope. We all expect that as well. Thanks, Mark. Have a good day. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.